Hello and welcome to Scrapbooking Station. In this video I've just got one card design and it's a quarter corner. So I'm going to work pretty slowly through this first demonstration talking about acrylic blocks and stamping, kind of for newbies, but I've got plenty of card designs and then some not using stamps at all. So I'm going to put the camera over my shoulder and we'll get started. Let's begin by looking at some of these materials. I have got Totally Quackers from Hunky Dory, so it's a set of ducks, a couple puddles, and sentiments. And so that's what I'm going to use. They're smallish kind of stamps. I've already picked out kind of my first. And so in this card design, what you want to try and do is more or less stay in 1/4 of your card front. In this case, this is going to be a panel because I want to mat and layer it onto card. Since the stamps are smaller, I'm going to start with a 5" by 3 3/4. And so my finished card is going to be 1 inch wider, and that gives me plenty of room to mat. Now I like to work on the block. So when I set up my stamp onto my acrylic block, and I think the most important thing with your blocks is having the right block for the job. And so whether you go in for the thicker, heavier ones or these thin cheapos, it doesn't matter as long as you set up your stamp so it's square. And so I'm actually setting up to the edge of the block. And this way when I bring it in, I can line up here and not have to worry about the actual stamps on the block. And I know I'm going to place it something like so, and then I'm going to have these cattail stamp behind there. So to that end, I stamped one and made a mask. Now as far as cardstock, stamping cardstock, I'm really more about the color white, or what color do I want to stamp it on. I've done several samples here. This is just computer cardstock, then I've got some Stamp Me cardstock, I've got Whisper White here and a natural white. You can see the images are all real clear as long as you have a juicy stamp pad, meaning a stamp pad with enough ink on it. Otherwise you're going to struggle to have a clear image. So I use archival or StazOn sometimes, but archival mostly because when I color and I'm going to want to watercolor, I always use water-based colors. So whether it's a pencil or paint or ink. So let me turn this in my direction and we'll get started stamping. Okay, so I've got everything ready to roll, and I know people bring the pad to the stamp. That's really not my thing. I'm going to make sure I've got a lot of ink on it. But what I'm always going to do is stamp it over here onto a scrap piece of paper. So I want to check it, putting the pressure that I'm going to put on my stamp. I just want to check out that cue a little bit. It actually does have a little line on it, so that's the way the stamp's supposed to go. Everything looks good. I want to make sure I get those little duck feet, a little more pressure on those duck feet. So again, since I've lined up my stamp, or my block, instead of the stamps, I'm just watching the edge against my panel. So I'm going to put it down, make sure I get those feet, and this should be perfect. Okay, now I'm going to set up my mask. Actually, I'm going to let it set for a little bit and I'll be back. Okay, so my mask is actually on copy paper, and the only thing I want to make sure is that my ink doesn't bleed, because when I cross over my cattails, I want to make sure it's not going to show through. So I could put a temporary adhesive, and I would use Easy Dots if I needed to, but since this guy is not really small, I don't think he's going to go anywhere. So I'm going to exactly position him. If I'm going to be missed, I want to be missed toward the inside, because I really want to try and avoid having a little white line. Of course, a little one is not going to be too god-awful. So again, I'm going to really ink up my stamp. I'm going to check it. Over here, very juicy. I know kind of where I want to put it. I've also squared him off, so I know, again, I'm watching the bottom of my line, and I know where I want him. I am going to stamp off the card a little bit. Now it's really important this guy gets on there well. I'm going to hold this down and pick this up. And so, and there he is in front of the cattails. So now, before I put water to it, and I've heard a lot of people say, my archival is bleeding, and that's probably because you don't wait long enough. So we're going to wait. While I'm doing that, let's set up the rest of the card this guy's going to set on. Okay, I didn't get too far on that, but just figuring out 5.5 by 4 1/4 finish card. And I have a 1/8 larger piece of black, and that's going to be my first mat because I have to decide on the color that I'm going to use for this guy. Now, since it isn't a watercolor class, just a couple things. And so, well, first off, I use my Stampin' Right markers to pick up ink and water, and I like trying to get away with the largest paintbrush I can. And I like to test the color on the same material that you're going to do the actual image, because the different materials are going to react differently. So I've got little water in these wells, and what I like to do first off, let me make sure this brush is clean. And then I've got a little paper towel here to kind of take off extra. Too much water is not good. But I like to take this large area, and again, I'm kind of getting away with the largest brush I can, and I am going to just put water on an area that I think I can cover with kind of one scoop of color. And that's going to create a channel for my ink. So it's really not going to want to go anywhere other than where I've got the water or the damp paper. It's not puddly. And so I always go with the light coating first. I'm going to go over the whole duck, and then I'll just continue to add, because as I pick up ink and have a drier brush, that color is going to get deeper. And it's easier to add color than it is to take away. But watercolors are very forgiving, and all I can say is the more you watercolor, the better I think you're going to like your results. So let me finish up coloring him. We'll pick the final mat, and we'll have the finished piece. Here's how the first note card turned out. And in the end, I went ahead and I wanted the same exact color for this mat that I chose. So I took my Tangelo twist and applied it straight to the bill and the feet. And this way I can get a spot-on match, because with your water-based inks, when you add water, well, first off, they're going to lighten, but some of these darker colors, you need to be careful because the colors will split out of that color. So I wanted to be spot on. Of course, on the inside, I'm not going to do anything because this is a note card, so I just want to be able to write. But while I've got my stamps out, I'm going to go ahead and put my maker's mark. And also, I did the envelope. So this is a Stampin' Up! Envelope that fits with this card. As far as cleanup, I'm going to keep that mask with this stamp set. And that's probably going to live there forever. Because you never really, you can see a couple of things. If I need to trim out further, I will on the next project, but otherwise it's going to be like so. Of course, I want to clean my stamps, and so that's why I've got this little scrubber. So it's wet, dry, and stick it right back on here. Okay, I want to move around this card a little bit with some other stamp sets, so I'm going to leave you photos of this finished piece, and then I'm going to take a look at two others. So I've got my block setups, and then I'll be back. In this project, I moved my stamping to the bottom left, and that's because the toucan I chose, I want looking into the card. He looks silly looking off the card. The other thing I wanted to illustrate, I could have used the block for the toucan, another block for the sentiment, and then, a little block for these little flowers. But rather than do that, you get better stability in your stamping the larger the stamp. So I grouped a couple of these together, the ones I could, and then just added that third flower. And that's just so your block doesn't wobble when you're stamping. And so that's how he finished out. I just backed with a single mat matching the green. And this I colored with watercolor pencils. And I like those because as you add water, they actually brighten up as opposed to inks where you add water. So finish that off. This stamp set is from Hunky Dory also. It's called Birds of Paradise. Then I moved again. So now I'm going to move up to the top left, and that's because I've got lanterns. And this is Lovely Lanterns. It's also a Hunky Dory stamp set. And again, you saw where I married up a lot of images on one larger block. And again, more stability. And this probably illustrates it because I then had to go in and add my chain. And so that's the single strip. Well, first off, I didn't pick it up. I actually placed it onto my acrylic block. And let's ignore this for a little bit because this illustrates it really well. If I were to stamp it, it's got a real tendency to move back and forth and wobble. And so I used another little stripe, but you could just stick anything over here. You just want to make sure that when you're inking, you don't get any ink on the piece that's going to add stability. This way you can put down a lot of pressure. Anyway, finish that one up also with my maker's mark and my envelope stamping. Now, same thing. If you've got a larger stamp, and so this one comes from Polka Doodles. It's the Papillion stamp set. You can see where I've got my mask already included in there. I also wanted to talk about not only using masks to add dimension in your stamping, but different colors. The lighter colors look more like they're in the background. So in this case, I stamped them off first, and then masked it, and then I put my script background, and then stamped my sentiment. And that's how this turned out. And here I'm back to using my inks. So this is Highland Heather ink on a Wisteria Wonder cardstock. And then finished out the inside. So this is a specialized birthday card. And my maker's mark. Okay, I'm going to leave photos of this, and I've got 2 more projects to share. Before I leave stamping, I want to talk about these little mechanisms. So Misty and the followers of Misty. And if you need to make 4 of exactly the same card, I would suppose they would work for you. Also, if you use smaller stamping pads, I have 150 probably or more of these classic Stampin' Ups. And they're a little bit large to be bringing over to a small stamp and then bringing this down. Plus you see the way I clean. It's kind of a headache to have to pull that off and clean in my scrubber. Of course, alternatively, I could use a baby wipe, as I've seen been done. Now I've got a chamois. I might use it in the future. But if you've got smaller spots and you do have trouble getting crisp images, this is one way to go. Like I said, it's whatever you get used to. For me, not so much, because very rarely do I make more than 2 of similar cards. I wouldn't even say they're the same. Okay, I wanted to talk about using this card design with other materials. And so I've got a cutting die here that I just got. So I like using this quarter corner for new stuff because it comes together really quickly. So I've got my layered poinsettias here, and this is on some patterned paper, and so now whenever I see holly berries, I want to add sequins, if you saw my sequinizing. To finish up the interior, and also my maker's mark and the envelope. The other thing I do probably more than die cuts is toppers, and so this is a Hunky Dory Tropicana topper and papers. And so again, the proportions, this is a 7.5 by 4.5 inch card. And so I just added him into this bottom right corner, kind of finishing up the inside with stamps. And this is typically more how I use my stamps, as accompaniment to either cutting dies or toppers. Anyway, however you do it, this design is really cool. I like this dimension. And so I did want to toss in one more because I wanted to add more sequins and more elements to a stamped card. And so all I did was pull my sentiment out and layer him up on foam squares. And this way, it's more cohesive. So if I were to try and tie and add sequins to a flat stamp project, it would look a little bit out of sorts. And so that's this last guy. Anyway, like I said, as a quick design, or you need some mojo building, this is a great way to go. If you're trying out your stamp set for the first time, this is a great way to take it out for a spin. Anyway, I thank you for watching.